He did not throw her down the stairs that morning. That came later. That morning, 1933, inside a house her salary paid for, Frank Fay was counting column inches. Not hers. His. Tracking how many times his name appeared in the trade papers against how many times hers did. Her name was winning. He made a plan for the evening. He always had a plan. He did not ask himself what it would cost her. He never did. Cut to her. Same house. Same morning. She was already up. She had learned, in Brooklyn foster homes before she was 5, that the world does not wait. She was thinking about the scene she had to shoot. She had already memorized everyone else's lines, not just her own, because that was how she worked, because she was always ready. She was 25 years old and already the most in-demand woman in Hollywood. She did not know what he was planning. One of them knew exactly what that day would become. The other was making breakfast. He planned it. She lived it. Women's tragedy shows you both sides, because his version should never be the only one that gets told. Subscribe. His name was Francis Anthony Donner. He changed it before anyone could know him by it. Smart move. He understood, from the beginning, that a name is a thing you construct, not a thing you receive. He became Frank Fay. He built that name into something that filled rooms. By the early 1920s, Frank Fay was earning $17,500 a week as the highest-paid headliner in vaudeville. He played the Palace Theater in New York City, the Cathedral, the Pinnacle, the room that meant you had arrived, sometimes once a month. He pioneered the thing we now call stand-up comedy. One man, alone on a stage, talking directly to an audience as if he owned the air between them. Jack Benny, years later, said he had modeled his entire early stage character on Frank Fay. He was, in the plain words of the American Vaudeville Museum, dismissive and unpleasant even when sober. He was 37 years old when he married H. She was 20. He was the biggest name in the room. She was just starting. What he wanted, specifically, concretely, as a fact about his character, was to be the most important person in every room he entered. That had always been enough. He had organized his entire existence around it. He chose her when she was still small enough that he could not yet see what she was going to become. That was the first miscalculation. He had made his decision. Now we leave him and we go to her. We will not be giving him this much space again. Her real name was Ruby Stevens. She was born on July 16, 1907, in Brooklyn, New York, the youngest of 5 children. Her mother, Catherine, was killed when Ruby was 4, pushed from a moving streetcar. Her father, Byron, a bricklayer, was gone inside of 2 weeks. He went to Panama. He did not come back. 4 years old. Both parents. 2 weeks. I want you to hold that number. Because everything that Barbara Stanwyck became, the discipline of her, the professionalism of her, the fact that she never once had to be told twice, all of it runs in a direct line back to that age. To those 2 weeks. To a child who learned, before she could read, that the ground beneath you is not guaranteed. She and her brother Malcolm were sent to board with families who took in orphans. They lived in separate houses. She described the loneliness of those years in a single word, in a single interview, and then moved on. She did not dwell. Dwelling was a luxury she had never had. Her older sister Mildred was a showgirl, chorus work, reviews, the touring circuit. When Mildred came back to New York between jobs, she sometimes took Ruby along. Ruby would stand in the wings of every theater they passed through, watching, already paying attention, already learning what it looked like when someone held a room. At 13, she left school and got a job wrapping packages at a department store, then waitressing, then at 15 chorus work, dancing in speakeasies and nightclubs in Prohibition-era New York City. The clubs were not safe places. The money was unreliable. She showed up anyway. She learned that she could make something out of nothing, which is the only thing she ever really needed to know. She was dancing in a city run by bootleggers and danger, living in a rooming house, counting what she had, and she was already, at 15, the most self-sufficient person in most rooms she entered. She did not perform toughness. She simply moved through the world as if it were a thing to be navigated, not a thing to be afraid of, because fear had never kept her fed. In 1926, A playwright named Willard Mack was casting a Broadway production called The Noose. He wanted a real chorus girl, someone whose body already knew what that life felt like. A friend introduced him to Ruby Stevens. She auditioned. He gave her the part and then kept building it, kept adding scenes, kept shaping the role around what he saw in her. He coached her every day before rehearsals. She told him she couldn't act. He told her, "Good. Just act naturally." She had never had a formal acting lesson. She would never have one. The Noose opened on October 20th, 1926, to unanimous praise. Ruby Stevens, that night, became Barbara Stanwyck. Mack had borrowed the name from two theatrical histories on a shelf. She took it without ceremony. She took everything without ceremony. That was how she was. Her second Broadway show was burlesque, and she had the lead. Second play. No training. No connections. She had nothing but the thing inside her that the camera, when she got in front of one, would treat like light. Here is what people who worked with her said. Specifically, because specific is the only thing that tells the truth. She learned everyone's name. Not to be charming. She genuinely cared who people were. Grips, costume women, stagehands, the people the industry did not see. She saw them. She came from them. She never forgot it. She arrived at every set with every line memorized, her own, and the lines of every actor playing against her. So she could be fully present. So she could give them something real to react to instead of waiting for her cue. She hated pretension the way only someone can who has actually been poor. Hollywood's elaborate displays of wealth and social climbing genuinely disgusted her. She preferred a meal that cost something and meant something over a party that meant nothing and cost everything. She kept a clean room. Order, for someone who had grown up without any, felt like the first kind of wealth she had ever owned. She loved her work with a discipline that looked, from the outside, like ambition. It wasn't. It was survival transformed. Everything she had done since she was 4 years old had been about making herself impossible to leave behind, because the world had left her behind, and she had decided, young and quietly and completely, that it would not do that again. She was 20 years old when she married Frank Fay. She had no reason to see what was coming. He looked, from where she stood, like a door opening. She would spend the next 7 years learning that it was his door, not hers. When Frank Fay brought Barbara Stanwyck to Hollywood in 1929, the story from her side was straightforward. He was the star. He had the contracts. Warner Brothers had come to him when sound arrived. Exactly the kind of talent they needed, a voice made for rooms. They cast him as Master of Ceremonies in their most expensive production of 1929, the All-Star Revue, the show of shows. His wife came along. That was simply how it was. What she saw. A husband who had opened the door. What was actually happening? A man bringing a 21-year-old woman to a new city where his name was everything and hers was nothing, and where he intended, whether consciously or not, to keep that arrangement. She was not supposed to be the story. She was supposed to be the wife of the story. The camera made a different decision. Frank Capra put her in Ladies of Leisure in 1930. Capra, who would go on to direct It Happened One Night, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It's a Wonderful Life, later said that working with Stanwyck changed his understanding of what screen acting was. That she arrived in front of a camera and something happened that he had not been able to engineer from other actresses, no matter how skilled. He built 3 more films around her in the following years. He did not need to be told twice. What she thought. She was finally getting a chance. What was actually happening? In her first Hollywood film, she was becoming something her husband was not going to be able to contain. Fay's films failed. The persona that had made him a god in vaudeville, sardonic, superior, performing from a great cold height, did not survive contact with a camera that required you to be real. He had spent his entire career perfecting his performance. He did not know how to stop performing. He did not know there was anything else. She only knew real. That was all she had ever had. His name stopped appearing at the top of studio rosters. Hers kept climbing. The column inches shifted. The money shifted. The phone calls shifted. What had been his world, the deference, the attention, the gravitational pull of fame in a room, began to reorganize itself around her. He noticed. She noticed him noticing. What she did, because she had spent 20 years learning that nothing holds itself together unless you hold it, was try to manage it. She came to his defense in interviews. She managed his image publicly. She began to register, not yet in the front of her mind but clearly in the back of it, a particular quality to his silences. The way an afternoon could curdle. The way a compliment paid to her in his presence could change the temperature of the room. The way the evenings became unreliable. She told herself it would pass. His next move was already decided before she understood the first O. And here is the record. Not his version of it. The record. His film career collapsed. The studio contracts ended. He pivoted to live review shows, grand, expensive productions with his name at the top of the marquee. He needed her name underneath his to sell tickets. He needed her to appear. He told her this. She appeared. She stood on stages that were not film sets, in shows designed to keep his career breathing, performing physical work that her body was not built to sustain. Over those years, 1930, 1931, 1932, she accumulated skeletal injuries the record is careful to document. Falls during obligatory performances. Cumulative damage to her back. Damage to her hip. She was 5 feet 3 inches tall, and she came away from those years with one leg measurably shorter than the other, a spine that required nightly intervention to manage, a hip that would cause her pain. She described 50 years later in 2 words. It hurts. Present tense. He moved to the next step. She was still recovering from the last one. His drinking deepened. Not socially. Weeks at a stretch, sometimes days without stopping. He went in and out of sanatoriums, the rehabilitation centers of the era. Each time he returned, the drinking began again. Oscar Levant, the composer and wit who watched the marriage from close range, described Frank Fay's hold over Stanwyck during those years as suffocating and total. She did not stop working. While he was in a sanatorium, she was on a set. While she was filming Gambling Lady in 1934, the production's texture was this. Shooting days, story conferences, costume fittings, hours under the lights. Between those hours, 4 hours under quartz lamps to reduce the pain in her hip enough to keep going. After the shooting day ended, she went home and was strapped onto a board, flat, unable to move, so her damaged spine could decompress overnight, and she could stand up and begin again. She was 26 years old. She never mentioned it to the press. He did not think about what it cost her. That was never part of his plan. In December 1932, they adopted a son. She named him Dion. She had not been able to have children of her own. A procedure when she was 15 had made that impossible. She had wanted a child with a specific, quiet grief she rarely allowed herself to discuss. Dion was the child she gave that want to. Witnesses to the household left accounts. Fay's rages had no reliable trigger. They could ignite in the middle of an ordinary conversation, without warning, if something favorable was said about someone he disliked, or about her. Especially about her. He drank for days without stopping. He yelled at their 2-year-old son. He was, according to people who lived with them and saw the daily reality, not a man who could be safely left alone with a child. She had already invited a friend to move in because she no longer felt safe in the house alone with her husband. She was managing his career, managing his image, managing the house, managing the child, sleeping on a board for her back. His world stayed the same size. Hers kept shrinking. Nobody stopped it. One evening, she came home and mentioned she had been to a burlesque show. He knocked her down in front of their son. Dion was small, barely 2. He screamed. What the record shows about the next morning. Barbara Stanwyck arrived on set with her back taped. Her director looked at her and asked what happened. I fell down the stairs, she said. He did not press it. He later said he had assumed Frank Fay had thrown her down them. He moved on. She did not. That was the difference between their 2 worlds. On a separate occasion, Frank Fay threw their toddler son into the swimming pool. She had managed every other thing. She had been knocked down. She had taped her own back, walked onto a set, and given a director an explanation he was too polite to question, and kept moving. She had absorbed all of it. But her child was not something she was going to absorb. She asked for a divorce. He got what he wanted. She lost what she had. Those two sentences are the whole story, but not the end of it, because there was still the part where he made her fight for it. For 7 years, Barbara Stanwyck had been telling herself a story about her marriage. The story was, Frank Fay is a brilliant man being destroyed by alcoholism and the cruelty of an industry that discarded him. He is suffering. He is not himself. If she manages enough, works enough, earns enough, covers enough, he will find his footing again. She believed it because it was the story available to her. Because she was a woman in 1931 in a world that handed women very few other stories about this kind of marriage. And because her entire life had shown her that if you work hard enough, the situation improves. From Brooklyn to Broadway to Hollywood. Work hard enough. Show up. It improves. It did not improve. When she filed for divorce in 1935, what she was fighting was not abstract. It was procedural and specific and brutal. He contested custody of Dion. Not because the record of his fatherhood supported such a claim, the screaming, the rages, the pool, but because she wanted Dion. Because Dion was the one thing she would fight for regardless of the cost, and he knew it. He had known it from the morning she brought the boy home. The record also shows this. Frank Fay had previously refused to appear at the formal hearing required to complete the adoption. He only went when she threatened to leave him. He had used the adoption itself, her longing, the thing she had wanted most, as leverage from the beginning. He was not a man undone by circumstance. He was a man who understood leverage and applied it without sentimentality, and who happened to drink while doing it. The divorce was finalized December 30th, 1935, less than 5 minutes in court. She testified that she was unable to live with him or give her best work to her films because he harassed her. The judge had seen enough. She won custody of Dion. In court, the judge asked Frank Fay his profession. "I am the greatest comedian in the world," he answered. He was under oath. His attorney, afterward, asked why he had said that. Fay said, "I was under oath, wasn't I?" Now the reframe. For 7 years she had believed she was managing a man in decline. What she had actually been doing was funding, covering for, and physically absorbing the consequences of a man whose ego had found a target, and who had never, not once, been out of control. He had been perfectly in control. Every rage was a regulation. Every incident of violence was a message. Every time he used the child, the finances, the press, it was leverage applied deliberately. He didn't lose himself to alcohol. He used alcohol. There is a difference, and it is the difference between a man you can save and a man you cannot. When she understood this, truly understood the shape of it, everything she had spent 7 years explaining to herself had to be explained again. Differently. She had not been managing a tragedy. She had been living inside one. As an old woman, Barbara Stanwyck told a reporter that if she had one thing to do over in her life, she would not have married Frank Fay. One sentence. No elaboration. She had always known which words to leave out. Here is what Frank Fay got. He got 7 years of her income. He got her name on his marquees. He got the public cover she provided. Defending him in interviews, absorbing the damage, standing on a set with her back taped and offering a story no one pressed her on, while he drank and raged in private. He got a divorce that cost him nothing beyond the custody battle he lost. He was never charged with anything. No institution ever held him responsible. There was no mechanism in 1935 for what he had done to a woman in her own home to become anything other than private. He kept working. Nightclubs, radio. And then, in 1944, he originated the role of Elwood P. Dowd in the Broadway production of Harvey. A gentle, eccentric, beloved man who sees a large invisible rabbit and is regarded by everyone around him as essentially harmless. He received rave reviews. That is the version of Frank Fay the official record is most generous to. There is another version in the record. In January 1946, just months after the defeat of Nazi Germany, 10,000 people gathered at Madison Square Garden for a pro-fascist rally organized in his name. It was called the Friends of Frank Fay. Those political views were not separate from the man who had knocked his wife down and thrown their toddler into a pool. They were the same man, the same ideology, different rooms. He died September 25, 1961, in Santa Monica. He was 69 years old. His name now exists almost entirely as a footnote in hers. He would have hated that more than anything. Here is what Barbara Stanwyck lost. She lost her body's wholeness. She left that marriage with a spine requiring constant management, a hip whose pain she described in present tense 50 years on, and a frame that had been put through stages and falls and nights on a board for another man's benefit, and carried those costs silently, for decades, because that was what she did with things she could not change. She lost 7 years that should have been the freest and most electric of her life. The years Capra was building films around her face, the years Hollywood was deciding she was irreplaceable. Spent instead in a state of perpetual management and vigilance, using a fraction of herself for the work and the rest for survival. She lost her son in the long run. Not at once, she won custody and she tried. But Dion was sent to boarding school at 6, to military academy at 14. He would later say he did not see his mother for 4 years. He became permanently estranged from her at 19. The rift never healed. He died in 2006. What Frank Fay had done to that household did not stop doing it the day the divorce was finalized. Return to the mornings. His morning. 1933. The house her salary paid for. He was counting column inches. He was tracking the ratio of her name to his in the trade papers. He had a plan forming. He knew what the evening was going to look like. Now we understand exactly what he was planning. Her morning. Same house. Same light. She was already up. She was running through the afternoon in her head. She had every line memorized, hers and everyone else's. She was making breakfast. She was humming. She had no idea what that day was going to cost her. Now we understand exactly what she was walking into. Barbara Stanwyck made 86 films in 38 years. She was nominated for the Academy Award 4 times. She won none. In 1982, 44 years after her first nomination, 38 years after she had been the highest-paid woman in the United States, the Academy gave her an honorary Oscar. She accepted it. She thanked the people she needed to thank. She did not say what she was thinking. She rarely did. Cecil B. DeMille wrote in his autobiography that among all the actresses he had ever directed, Barbara Stanwyck was his favorite, one on whom a director could always count to do her work with all her heart. Frank Capra said the camera did something with her face it did not do with other faces. Directors known for remaking actresses in their own image, Wilder, Lang, Stevens, Ford, all described the same thing. She arrived already complete. There was nothing to reshape. There was only something to aim the camera at. In 1944, Barbara Stanwyck was the highest-paid woman in the United States of America. That woman. I have read Frank Fay's account of these events. It is precise. It is carefully worded. It is, from beginning to end, completely absent of her. What strikes me about his version of this story is not what is in it. It is what is not. There is a woman in this story who slept on a board every night for months because of what his failing career had cost her body, and she does not appear anywhere in his telling. He does not register her absence. That is the thing about men like Frank Fay. They never have to notice the missing. Someone else always managed the missing. In his case, it was her. What justice looked like in this story was not a charge filed or a sentence handed down. There was none of that. What justice looked like was this. His name is a footnote. Hers fills the room. The marriage they had is now the definitive example of A Star is Born, the story of a man who cannot survive his wife's assent. Every time that film gets remade, 1937, 1954, 1976, 2018, his disintegration is the engine of the plot, and every time, without exception, the audience roots for her. Every single time. He is most famous for being the man who could not survive Barbara Stanwyck. She would have found that quietly funny. She would not have said so. She had always known which words to leave out. She was 4 years old when the world first took everything from her. She was 20 when she married a man who decided to do it again. She built herself back both times. What he did. He took 7 years, a body, a son's childhood, and a silence she carried until she died, and walked away without consequence. What she gave. 60 years of work so honest and so complete that a camera could do nothing with it but tell the truth. Nothing after. The contrast is the verdict.